And joining us for a completely different angle on this, columnist for the Daily Beast, David Rothkopf. His latest piece is entitled, "It's Time for President Biden to Take Back Control of the Texas Border." So, there's this whole other issue with the governor of Texas and razor wire. What should Joe Biden do that he's not doing right now, David?
Well, I think he should continue doing what he has been doing with regard to trying to get this bill through the Senate, because the reality is that a strong bill like this, which is stronger than any bill that we've seen come out of the Congress in this century, really represents the best bipartisan chance to solve this problem. But if this bill does go down in flames, then what is necessary is that the president use the means at his disposal to get the state of Texas to comply with the Supreme Court and the Constitution of the United States. That means sending in federal authorities to act in the way the Supreme Court said they have every right to act. It could mean nationalizing the Texas National Guard. It could even mean, as Dwight Eisenhower did in the case of Brown versus Board of Education, sending in U.S. troops to ensure that the Constitution is followed and the federal government, not the government of Texas, controls our borders.
So, David, let's talk about the other part of this coin, which is what the Republican governors are doing, that in Texas, of course, but also others in red states who are coming to his assistance. What are the dangers you see that if the Biden administration doesn't step in forcefully like you're advocating, what could happen?
Well, look, I mean, the dangers are extraordinary. Essentially, the language used by the state of Texas echoes the language used by the southern states when they seceded from the Union in 1861. And the astonishing fact that the Republican presidential frontrunner Donald Trump and 25 governors support this language suggests that you're on the beginning of a slippery slope where these Republicans could say, you know, we don't like what the federal government is doing on X or Y or Z, and so we're not going to do it anymore. We're going to ignore federal authority. And that's the beginning of the end of the Union as we see it. We're not quite at the point of civil war, but we are at the point of people talking seditiously, number one among them, Donald Trump.
Yeah. In Gwad's report, we heard from Republican Governor Kristi Noem of South Dakota. Here's a bit more of what she said in support of Texas's use of razor wire fences, despite the Supreme Court decision, and also Governor Kevin Stitt of Oklahoma.
You know, it's interesting, the decision that came out of the Supreme Court. They talked about the fact that Biden could take down concertina wire, razor wire. Texas will put it back up. I think there'll be other legal challenges, but I'm proud of the fact that this state and 25 other governors are standing and declaring and protecting our state sovereignty. Texas and those 13 original colonies would have never signed the treaty that formed the first Constitution of the United States if they didn't think that their right to protect themselves and defend their own people was protected.
We all agree that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. And if the Supreme Court gets something wrong, for example, if they tried to ban and say that we didn't have the Second Amendment right to bear arms, I think the Constitution supersedes somebody in Washington, D.C. telling us.
I mean, David, it just seems like the Republican Party, especially the House Republicans, are being everything but Republican. They don't want strong borders. They don't want the strongest border legislation that they could get. Now we've got them saying, you know, they don't really respect the Constitution. They don't respect the Supreme Court. I mean, this was the party that always was very proud of being the party of the rule of law. Who are they? And what happened to the Republican Party?
Well, you know, we watched Trumpism happen to the Republican Party. It's a kind of collective mental illness. They've lost their damn minds. They are not adhering to the Constitution. They are saying that the federal government does not have authority. And if they really care about the border, then I hope these 25 governors will stand up and support this bipartisan legislation and send a message to Mike Johnson that it should pass in the House. If they really want to do something about it, then do something about it. And by the way, if they do that, they will also participate in not betraying, as Mike Johnson seems to want us to do, our national security by undermining the ability to get funds to Ukraine, which he is tied to this border deal. There are multiple betrayals that the Republican Party is working on right now, and they need to be called on it. They need to be asked, if you really care about the border, are you doing everything that's possible to defend that border?
Columnist at the Daily Beast, David Rothkopf, thank you very much for your insight this morning.